The Prophet Muhammad is considered by most who identify as Muslim to be the final prophet of God. In Islam, he was known for many things, including how he cared for all of his wives. Which leads us to this episode where we'll be looking at 10 surprising facts about the Prophet Muhammad's wives. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of FTD Facts. My name is Leroy Kenton, and I know that this subject can often be judged very harshly by non-Muslims. However, I did attempt to highlight the actual beliefs and info about the wives of the Prophet Muhammad from the perspective of Muslims as accurately as possible. So this video is not intended to be a religious debate, nor is it intended to convince anyone of anything. We're just simply here sharing the information. So with that said, let's jump into the episode, starting with number 10. Here we have Khadijah Binkuali. Khadijah was the first wife of the Prophet Muhammad, who she met as a widow of a very wealthy merchant. She had actually hired Muhammad before he was considered a prophet, but soon after she came to see him as a potential husband. And according to most sources, she was about 40 years old and the Prophet Muhammad was 25 years old when they got married. The Prophet Muhammad and Khadijah, they had 6 children together, including 2 sons who ended up passing away as infants. While she was alive, Prophet Muhammad did not marry any other women. From there, let's move on to number 9, where we have Bint Zama. After 25 years of marriage, Khadijah had passed away, so the Prophet Muhammad was left to raise a family, and he found that he couldn't really devote as much time to promoting Islam as he really wanted to, so he ended up deciding to marry again. And he chose to marry a widow by the name of Bint Zama. And the Prophet Muhammad, he looked for the approval for their marriage from her parents, and then they told him to just ask her and see if she'll accept. So of course, she accepted, and they were married for 3 years before the Prophet Muhammad took another wife. Moving on now to Aisha bint Abu Bakr. Aisha was a daughter of Abu Bakr, who was one of the Prophet Muhammad's closest friends. She was married to him at a very young age, and Aisha was raised a Muslim. And after the marriage, she and the Prophet Muhammad became extremely close, and Muslims believe that Aisha narrated more than 2,000 hadith, which are the record of the words and actions of the Prophet Muhammad. And Aisha was actually one of the only 3 of the Prophet Muhammad's wives who actually memorized the Quran in entirety. As years went on, Aisha was widowed at the age of around 18 or 19 years old, but she went on to teach as well as play a very significant role in the spreading of Islam for over 40 years. Number 7 brings us facts about Hafsa bint Umar ibn al-Khattab. And she was Prophet Muhammad's 4th wife, and she was also the daughter of one of the Prophet Muhammad's closest companions named Umar ibn al-Khattab. Now their marriage was more so for a political alliance, and Hafsa had been married at a young age as well. As a matter of fact, Hafsa and Aisha were the youngest of the Prophet Muhammad's wives, and both had pretty similar personalities, and it was said that they were very strong young women, and they also apparently they got along really well. The next fact involves Zainab bint Khuzaimah, and she was the first of the Prophet Muhammad's wives that did not come from the tribe of Quraysh, which the Prophet Muhammad was also from. She ended up passing away less than a year after their marriage, so because of that, there's very little known about her. But before this marriage, she earned the title of the mother of the poor due to her generosity that she showed to poor people. On that note though, guys, if you're enjoying this episode so far, we do have a lot more information to look at, but I just had to let you know that we do have videos about the Prophet Muhammad. There's one in the video description section that I do highly recommend. It's a very popular one here on FTD Facts, so if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. And I also have a link to a playlist that has even more religious topics. So again, the link to that is below in the video description section. I'll also provide a link to those in the card section of this episode, so whichever one you prefer, click on something to keep on learning here with us here on FTD Facts. Okay, so for number 5, here we have Salama bint Abu Amaya. Salama, she married the Prophet Muhammad at the age of 29 years old, and this was after her first husband had passed away. She and her husband were some of the first to leave Mecca to Medina when she was forced to separate from her husband, and also her son was abducted. And at the passing of her husband, she ended up marrying the Prophet Muhammad. And Salama, she narrated more than 300 hadiths, and there was a lot of them that related to women. Now let's look at Joaria bint AlHeret. Joaria, she came to the Prophet Muhammad's attention when she was actually captured in the battle against the tribe of Banu Mustalik. She was 20 years old at the time and the daughter of the chief Banu Mustalik, and her marriage created an alignment between her tribe as well as the Muslims. And when the Prophet Muhammad married Joaria, it allowed the tribe to enter Islam with honor by removing all of the humiliation of their defeat. Soon as they announced publicly that they were married, all the wars stopped, as well as all the captives of war, they were set free. And in total, Joaria was married to the Prophet Muhammad for 6 years. Number 3 brings us Zainab Bint Jahsh. She was married first to one of the Prophet Muhammad's freed slaves, but their marriage was short-lived and it was very problematic, a whole lot of turmoil happening. So the Prophet Muhammad actually allowed them to get a divorce. Now, of course, divorce was never the ideal situation. It's very frowned upon. And also, because of divorce, it usually left the women in a more difficult situation than the man. So to satisfy everyone involved, including Zainab's family, the Prophet Muhammad ended up marrying her. And Zainab began to be very popular and known for her works of charity. For number 2, let's look at Habiba bint Abu Sufyan. Habiba is also known as Ramallah, and she was a daughter of Abu Sufyan, who was a leader of the Quraysh tribe and as well as an enemy of Islam at that time. But she stated her beliefs in Islam despite the consequences that she would face. Now, her husband had passed away after the migration to Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia, and she was all alone in a foreign country with her young daughter. So, of course, she was in a very difficult situation. Now, when the Prophet Muhammad heard of this, he offered to marry her and she accepted. And the final fact in this episode has to deal with Safia bin Huyay ibn Akhtab. Safia was born in Medina to the chief of the Jewish tribe Banu Nadir, and in the year 629 CE, the Muslims won the Battle of Khaybar and Safia was taken as a slave. Now, the Prophet Muhammad did suggest that Safia should convert to Islam, and after she did, they got married. Now, despite her conversion though, Muhammad's other wives, they used to tease Safia from coming from Jewish lineage, but the Prophet Muhammad, he once said this, and I quote, "If they discriminate you again, tell them that your husband is Muhammad. Your father was Prophet Aaron and your uncle was Prophet Musa. So what is there in that to be scornful about?" Safia was 21 years old when the Prophet Muhammad passed away, and she lived for another 39 years after that. So that's it for this episode. I really hope you found this episode really interesting and you gained a little bit more insight into this topic. There's so much more that can be said, but right now I just want to hear from you guys. Leave all your thoughts and comments down below, and don't forget to watch those videos that I did recommend for you. Until next time, stay awesome, stay educated, and I'll see you tomorrow in the next episode.